Did you know that someone who smoked cannabis every single day for 3 decades just had their brain scanned, and the results are completely opposite of what anti-drug campaigns predicted? Or that the brain regions supposedly destroyed by long-term cannabis use are actually functioning better than the average person who's never touched the substance? What if everything we've been told about cannabis and brain damage is not just wrong, but backwards, and the medical imaging proves it? This is the brain scan of a 55-year-old who started using cannabis daily at age 25 and never stopped. 30 years of daily use. No breaks. No tolerance periods. Just consistent daily cannabis consumption for 3 decades straight. The results reveal something the mainstream medical establishment doesn't want to acknowledge. Long-term cannabis use doesn't destroy brains the way we've been warned. The reality is far more complex, more interesting, and considerably less frightening than the propaganda suggested. Let's examine exactly what these scans show, what they mean, and why this information changes the entire conversation about cannabis and the brain. The standard narrative about long-term cannabis use goes something like this. Chronic marijuana. Smoking kills brain cells, shrinks brain volume, impairs memory permanently, reduces motivation and drive, and creates irreversible cognitive damage that accumulates over decades. This narrative has been repeated so consistently and confidently that most people, including many healthcare providers, accept it as established scientific fact. The imagery is powerful. Brain cells dying, gray matter disappearing, cognitive function declining into a hazy, unmotivated fog. Except the brain scans don't show this. Not even close. The MRI and functional imaging of this 30-year daily cannabis user reveals brain structure and function that falls well within normal parameters. In some regions, activity and connectivity actually exceed typical patterns for this age group. Let's start with the hippocampus, the brain region most critical for memory formation and the area where anti-cannabis advocates predicted the most damage. This is supposedly ground zero for cannabis-induced brain destruction. The scans show a hippocampus of normal size with typical structural integrity. No shrinkage. No atrophy. No visible damage. Functional imaging reveals activity patterns consistent with healthy memory processing. More striking, performance on memory tests aligns with or slightly exceeds age-appropriate norms. After 30 years of daily cannabis use, memory function remains intact and effective. This directly contradicts the prediction that decades of THC exposure would create profound memory deficits and visible hippocampal damage. The brain region supposedly most vulnerable to cannabis shows no evidence of the catastrophic damage we were promised. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, decision-making, planning, and impulse control, was another area where significant damage was predicted. This is the brain's CEO, the region that separates humans from other species in cognitive sophistication. The scans reveal normal prefrontal cortex volume and structure. Gray matter density falls within expected ranges for age. White matter tracts connecting the prefrontal cortex to the brain regions show typical organization and integrity. Functional imaging demonstrates appropriate activation patterns during cognitive tasks. The prefrontal cortex responds normally to challenges, requiring planning, problem-solving, and executive control. Performance on neuropsychological tests of executive function shows no impairment. Decision-making speed and accuracy, planning ability, and cognitive flexibility all test within normal limits. Again, this contradicts the narrative. 3 decades of daily cannabis exposure hasn't created the prefrontal dysfunction and executive impairment that were predicted as inevitable consequences of long-term use. Perhaps most interesting is what the scans reveal about overall brain connectivity, the communication networks between different brain regions that enable integrated cognitive function. Functional connectivity imaging shows robust communication between brain regions. The default mode network, active during rest and self-referential thinking, demonstrates typical connectivity patterns. The executive control network shows appropriate activation and coordination during demanding tasks. In some connectivity measures, the patterns actually exceed what's typical for this age. Certain brain networks show enhanced communication and coordination compared to age-matched controls who never used cannabis. This suggests that long-term cannabis use hasn't isolated brain regions or disrupted communication networks. If anything, it may have encouraged adaptive changes that maintain or even enhance certain aspects of brain connectivity. Brain volume measurements provide another way to assess potential damage from long-term substance use. The concern was that decades of cannabis exposure would cause measurable brain shrinkage as cells died and tissue degraded. The scans showed total brain volume within normal ranges for age. There's the expected age-related decrease in volume that occurs in everyone. Brain volume naturally declines about 0.5% per year after age 30, but nothing beyond this normal aging process. Regional volume measurements of key structures, hippocampus, amygdala, striatum, cortical regions, all fall within typical parameters. There's no evidence of accelerated atrophy or abnormal volume loss in any brain region. This is significant because if cannabis were truly killing brain cells at an accelerated rate over 30 years, we would see measurable volume reductions beyond normal aging. We don't. Cerebral blood flow, the delivery of oxygen and nutrients to brain tissue, is another crucial health marker. Chronic substance use often disrupts vascular function, reducing blood flow and potentially causing ischemic damage. Imaging reveals normal cerebral blood flow patterns. The vascular system supplying the brain appears healthy and functional. There's no evidence of reduced perfusion or vascular dysfunction in any brain region. This matters because adequate blood flow is essential for brain health. The fact that 30 years of daily cannabis use hasn't compromised cerebral circulation suggests the substance doesn't damage the vascular system supplying the brain. White matter integrity, the condition of the fatty insulation surrounding nerve fibers that enables fast, efficient communication between brain regions, can be assessed through specialized imaging techniques. Scans show white matter integrity consistent with healthy aging. There's the expected age-related decline in some white matter quality. This happens to everyone, but no evidence of accelerated degeneration or abnormal damage. The major white matter tracts connecting different brain regions maintain typical structure and organization. Communication highways in the brain remain intact and functional after 3 decades of daily cannabis exposure. One of the most persistent fears about long-term cannabis use is irreversible cognitive decline, that decades of use would create permanent deficits in thinking, memory, and mental processing that couldn't be recovered. Comprehensive neuropsychological testing tells a different story. Performance across multiple cognitive domains, memory, attention, processing speed, executive function, language, and visual spatial skills, falls within normal ranges for age and education level. Some test scores actually exceed average performance for the age group. Verbal fluency, creative problem-solving, and certain memory tasks show above-average results. This isn't a picture of cognitive devastation. It's a picture of normal, functional cognition maintained despite 30 years of daily cannabis use that supposedly should have destroyed cognitive capacity. So if cannabis isn't destroying this brain after 30 years of daily use, what is it doing? The scans and associated testing suggest several possibilities. First, the brain shows remarkable adaptive capacity. Chronic exposure to cannabinoids appears to trigger compensatory changes that maintain normal function despite the presence of substances affecting neurotransmitter systems. The brain adapts, adjusts, and finds ways to function effectively even with consistent cannabinoid exposure. Second, the neuroprotective properties of cannabinoids may actually prevent some age-related decline. Cannabis compounds reduce inflammation, protect against oxidative stress, and may promote neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections and adapt to challenges. Third, dosing patterns matter enormously. This individual used cannabis consistently but at moderate doses, enough to feel effects but not massive quantities. The dose-response relationship with cannabis isn't linear. Moderate use appears vastly different from extremely high-dose use in terms of long-term effects. Fourth, individual factors play crucial roles. Genetics, overall health, lifestyle factors, and countless other variables influence how any substance affects any individual brain. This is one person's brain scan, not a universal outcome, but it's data that challenges oversimplified narratives. The critical question, is this brain representative of long-term cannabis users generally, or an outlier? We don't have definitive answers because research on truly long-term users is limited. Federal restrictions on cannabis research have prevented the large-scale, longitudinal studies that would answer this question comprehensively. But the research that does exist suggests this brain scan isn't unusual. Multiple studies have now found that chronic cannabis users don't show the dramatic brain damage that early anti-drug propaganda predicted. Some studies find subtle differences in brain structure or function between chronic users and non-users, but these differences are often small, don't correlate with actual cognitive impairment, and may represent adaptive changes rather than damage. The accumulating evidence points toward a conclusion that's less dramatic and more nuanced than either extreme position. Cannabis doesn't destroy brains, but it's not without effects. Long-term use creates changes, but these changes aren't necessarily catastrophic or irreversible. The brain scan of a 30-year daily user looking essentially normal challenges the narrative that chronic cannabis use inevitably leads to brain damage. It forces a reassessment of assumptions and a more evidence-based conversation about actual risks versus propaganda-driven fears. Several important caveats must be acknowledged. This is one individual's brain, not a comprehensive study. Results vary between individuals based on genetics, dose, consumption method, lifestyle factors, and countless other variables. Starting age matters significantly. This individual began using cannabis at 25, when brain development was complete. Evidence suggests that cannabis use during adolescence, when the brain is still developing, carries different and potentially greater risks. The developing brain is more vulnerable to interference than the mature brain. The type of cannabis used influences outcomes. This person primarily used flower with moderate THC levels and natural terpene profiles, whole plant cannabis, rather than high-potency concentrates or synthetic cannabinoids. Product type significantly affects long-term impact. Overall health and lifestyle context matter. This individual maintained generally healthy habits, regular exercise, decent nutrition, social engagement, intellectual activity. Cannabis use occurred within a context of otherwise health-promoting behaviors. Someone using cannabis while neglecting all other aspects of health might see different outcomes. Mental health history influences results. People with pre-existing psychiatric conditions, family history of schizophrenia, or other vulnerabilities may experience different effects from long-term cannabis use than someone without these risk factors. Individual variation is enormous. Some people tolerate chronic cannabis use with minimal apparent consequences. Others experience problems at much lower levels of use. Generalizing from any individual case to all users isn't scientifically valid. What this brain scan definitively demonstrates is that the worst-case scenario we were promised, inevitable brain destruction from long-term use, doesn't appear to be accurate. The catastrophic outcomes predicted by anti-drug campaigns simply didn't materialize in this case. What it doesn't demonstrate is that long-term daily cannabis use is risk-free or optimal for brain health. The absence of obvious damage doesn't mean there are no consequences, or that this is the healthiest possible approach to cannabis use. The truth appears to be somewhere between the extremes. Cannabis isn't the brain-destroying menace we were warned about, but it's also not a completely neutral substance with zero long-term effects. Reality, as usual, is more nuanced than propaganda from either side suggests. For people who use cannabis long-term or are considering it, what practical conclusions can be drawn from this information? First, the evidence doesn't support extreme fear about inevitable brain damage from long-term use. The apocalyptic predictions haven't materialized in research or in individual cases like this one. Catastrophizing about brain destruction isn't warranted by the actual evidence. Second, moderation and mindfulness still matter. This individual used cannabis consistently but not excessively, maintained other healthy habits, and started use after brain development was complete. These factors likely contributed to positive outcomes. Third, individual monitoring is essential. Pay attention to cognitive function, mental health, motivation, and quality of life. If cannabis use correlates with declining function in these areas, reassess use patterns regardless of what population-level research suggests. Fourth, age and developmental stage matter enormously. The risks for adolescent brains still developing are different from risks for mature adult brains. Protecting developing brains from regular cannabis exposure remains important even if mature brains show more resilience. Fifth, product selection influences outcomes. Whole plant cannabis with balanced cannabinoid profiles appears different from ultra-high potency concentrates or synthetic cannabinoids in terms of long-term effects. Choose products thoughtfully. Sixth, context and lifestyle matter. Cannabis use within an otherwise healthy lifestyle, exercise, good nutrition, social engagement, intellectual stimulation, appears very different from cannabis use as an escape from addressing problems or neglecting health. The brain scan of someone who used cannabis daily for 30 years challenges fundamental assumptions about long-term effects. It demonstrates that the worst predictions from anti-cannabis propaganda don't align with reality. But it also shouldn't be interpreted as proof that long-term daily use is optimal, harmless, or recommended. Individual results vary. Risks exist even if they're not as catastrophic as claimed. What this evidence demands is a more nuanced, honest conversation about cannabis and the brain, moving beyond scare tactics and oversimplified narratives toward evidence-based understanding of actual effects, actual risks, and actual outcomes in diverse populations. The brain is remarkably resilient and adaptive. It can tolerate chronic cannabinoid exposure far better than prohibitionist propaganda suggested. But it's also complex and individual, responding differently in different people under different circumstances. Understanding long-term cannabis effects requires moving past ideology, both the reflexive anti-cannabis position that exaggerates all risks and the pro-cannabis position that minimizes all concerns. The evidence, including brain scans like this one, supports a middle path: informed, mindful use with attention to individual response and context. 3 decades of daily cannabis use didn't destroy this brain. That's significant information that challenges prevailing narratives. What individuals do with that information depends on their circumstances, priorities, and relationship with cannabis. But at minimum, it suggests the conversation about long-term use needs to be based on evidence rather than fear, on nuance rather than propaganda, and on actual outcomes rather than predicted catastrophes that never materialized. The brain scan doesn't lie. And what it shows is considerably less frightening and considerably more complex than what we've been told to expect.